Hello, today is Wednesday. I'm saying that out loud for my benefit and yours. It's a good reminder for all of us. This week during Holy Week, we're taking some time each day to look at some of the events leading up to Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. Our passage today is from Matthew 26. And in Matthew, this isn't necessarily a chronological account, but leading up to this passage, so in literary form, in the book of Matthew, leading up to this, what he has given us a picture of is Jesus in Jerusalem teaching. In some situations, it's talking to large groups of people. In another, it's on the Mount of Olives in a private audience with his disciples. And also in those passages, there's a little bit of sense of foreboding because there are these characters that Matthew gives us a glimpse of who are religious leaders called scribes, chief priests, Pharisees, Sadducees. And those people are seeking to entrap or discredit Jesus because he's a threat to their power systems, to their religious systems, to their structures, and he has confronted them and said that their own hearts are self-righteous. So in the midst of this, Jesus teaching, these groups of people seeking to entrap him, there's this account in Matthew 26 that's almost like a pause. We sort of catch our breath and see Jesus with friends and with his disciples at a home. So let's read these verses together. It's verses 6 through 13 of Matthew 26. Now, when Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came up to him with an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at table. And when the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this could have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. In pouring this ointment on my body, she has done it to prepare me for burial. Truly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." So in this scene, in Simon's house, a woman approaches Jesus. Matthew doesn't name her, but the account in John 12 tells us that this is Mary of Bethany. Mary was Lazarus and Martha's sister. Mary was a friend of Jesus. She saw Jesus perform miracles. She heard Jesus teach. She spent time with Jesus. She was the one who sat at his feet, and Mary was convinced in her heart that Jesus was the Messiah, that he was from God. And as Jesus had been teaching in the accounts in Matthew just before this story, he was intentionally revealing more of himself to the people, to the disciples, and Mary got it. She put all of these pieces together, the miracles, the teaching, who Jesus was, his friendship toward her and her brother and sister, and believed. She believed that he was the promised prophet, the promised king, and the promised savior. And in response, she approaches Jesus and pours out this expensive gift onto him in an act, a physical act that highlights his humanity and his divinity and shows Mary's recognition of who he is. Let's look in verse 7. It says, "A woman came up to him with an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment." We're given an indication in some other passages that when it says very expensive, this flask would have cost roughly a year's wages. So it was something that may have been a family heirloom. It may have been a sort of investment that would have given her family financial security. But whatever it was very valuable. And she responded to her recognition of Jesus in this act of worship and poured out the ointment on him. I was so struck by this story because it feels like we all are in a season of leanness right now. It feels like that because in many ways we are. Work might be scarce, money might be tight, you might have no income. When you do go to the store, it feels like the store shelves are picked over. I know in my life, it feels like patience is really scarce some days. My patience takes a nature hike in order to find emotional stability and gets lost in the wilderness somewhere. But in a season of leanness, God isn't lost in the wilderness. He's the same God of abundance, abundant life, and abundant joy that he has always been. He's the same God who Mary looked at and recognized and responded to in worship. In these passages, the religious leaders who are depicted for us, they responded to Jesus' teaching. They responded to Jesus' teaching and him by clinging tightly to things in which they had found power and security. They clung to their systems, to their religious order, to their self-righteousness. And Mary responded with an open heart and open hands, and instead of clinging to something that was very valuable, there was no question, it's clear that it was very valuable, she poured it out on Jesus in an extravagant display of worship in recognition of who he was. Even the disciples who were there with them some of them apparently thought that it was foolish, that it was almost a waste to take something so valuable and pour it out like that. And so it caused me to pause and ask, how am I responding right now during Holy Week in looking at Jesus? Am I responding to this season of leanness by clinging to things in which I thought I had security, by clinging to things that I think will give me financial stability, by clinging to systems and hoping that they will just return to the way they were so that I can find security in them again, by clinging to my own self-righteousness or my own ability to power through? Or am I looking at Jesus this week during Holy Week, seeing God who sent Jesus on our behalf as a God of abundance, and seeing his most extravagant display of love on our behalf in that, in giving us Jesus, in Jesus' death on the cross, and responding in kind by giving something valuable in return, pouring out myself, my heart in worship? Am I opening my heart and my hands like Mary did? Or am I clinging tightly to things that I believe will give me security? What we want to encourage you to do today is to look around you to see what you have in your home that feels very valuable right now, and to use some of those items to put together a care package to bless someone else. So that might be a roll of toilet paper or your secret stash of your favorite chocolates, or maybe it feels like your time is very valuable right now, so maybe you should sit and write a note. Gather up those things, a note, your special chocolates, a roll of toilet paper, whatever it is, and put those together in a care package and either mail it or give it to someone. Go do a door drop at someone's house. Before you do that, pray. Pray that giving of something that is valuable to you right now is an act of worship in response to God's love poured out on us, in recognition of the fact that God is a God of abundance and that isn't actually changed in a season that feels like leanness. So we respond to God's abundant gifts to us by worshiping, opening our heart and hands, and by sharing what we have of value.